for coming to this talk sponsored by the Instructional Technology program here in the Department of Professional Studies in the College of Education. I have the most wonderful honor of introducing Dr. Carr-Chellman from Penn State University. She is the department head of the Learning and Performance Systems Department. There we go. Allie has been a hero of mine for years when I was a graduate student, so I am truly thrilled to introduce her for this talk. She's been doing a lot of great work over the last couple of years. 3 years ago, she led a TED Talk on bringing back the voice, and you'll get to hear a little bit about that project today. She's also working on one of my favorite projects, and that's cataloging off-the-shelf games to align with Common Core curriculum. So if you are planning to be a teacher, if you are a teacher, and you're looking for that evidence to help you with support of why you want to use games in the curriculum, it's a great project. One of her more recent projects she's working on, and she'll talk a little bit about, is building leadership skills and collaboration in gaming as well. That's a big topic right now. So without further ado, let me hand this over to Allie for her talk. Let's see if this will work. Move it up a little bit. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. I talk pretty loudly anyway, so I may not even need the microphone too much. So thank you very much, Tanya, for organizing all of this and for inviting us out here. We're so grateful. We had a wonderful tour of the West. We started out in Denver. We came from State College, started out in Denver, and I spoke at the University of Denver, and then my husband and I spoke at Colorado State. And then we went up and saw the Tetons, which is where I used to vacation as a kid. And so I brought my kids to experience that. So yeah, my husband Davin, my daughter Isla, my son Asher, and my son Jules. And they're grateful to be out here with us as well. So thank you for inviting us to the University of Wyoming. We're very, very glad to be here with you. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the projects that are going on under my research team at Penn State University. And I'm particularly interested in trying to inspire you a little bit to think about how you might use games in your own future classrooms or in your classrooms at the university, or lots of different ways of thinking about that. But with kids, with your experiences, how you can get people to be learning through what we already know are some of the best motivational tools on the planet, and that is games. So I don't think we really need a lot more research on human motivation. Silicon Valley has solved this problem for us. It's quite clear, especially for boys between the ages of about 9 and 19. We got to figure it out. We don't need to know about human motivation anymore. So I'm interested in trying to help you think today a little bit about how to integrate games into the curriculum. And I'm particularly interested in taking that from a cultural perspective and thinking about boys. So my interest has been in noticing that we were losing a lot of boys and they were becoming alienated and disengaged. And how can we think about a curriculum that's more engaging? I would argue that games are engaging for both boys and girls. Girls also play, about half the gamers are girls, but the games that they play are very different. So the games that they tend to play are more like Farmville, Words with Friends, other kinds of social media games. And boys tend to play more hardcore things like Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, those kinds of things, Clash of Clans, etc. So we're going to talk a little bit about boys in particular because we seem to be losing them at record numbers. But I believe that what we may do for boys in gaming is likely to be useful for all kids when it comes down to it. So this is kind of talking a little bit about the project that I'm doing at Penn State, which is called Bring Back the Boys. And it's a wide swath. We're talking anywhere from 3-year-olds all the way up through college kids, and how we can think about gaming to re-engage boys and young men. So why do we want to start with boys? Again, there are lots of girls who are also gaming, but boys we're losing at very record rates. And so what I would like to suggest is that when we think about how to integrate games into the curriculum, we should first think about what games boys are playing and take them from there. And that's where I'm going to kind of end the talk at the end here. So we'll talk a little bit about what boys are like. Okay. Well, this is what we wish they were like, right? Here they are, the first day of summer, reading their books, right? In a hammock, lovely. Ties. I think these guys are off to a Glee concert or something. They look like they're ready for something. Boy Scouts. These are the images that we like to think of, and what boys are like. But what are they really like? Okay. Here's what they're really like, right? They love video games. They've always got them in their hands. They love superheroes and all kinds of violent fantasy life. They love guns. They're always playing with them, right? And generally, if you ask them how they feel about school, what will they tell you? What 3 subjects are their favorites? Recess. Lunch. And PE. Those are their 3 favorite topics, exactly. So how do we get boys back into school, is a real significant issue because they pretty much like, recess, lunch, and gym. So why is this a problem? Well, first of all, if you're a boy, you happen to be 3 times as likely to be expelled, suspended, in special education, diagnosed as learning disabled or emotionally disturbed. So for every 100 boys who are diagnosed as special education, there are 300 or 400 boys. All right, if you talk to most special education teachers in the schools today, they'll tell you that they have 4 boys for every girl, 3 boys for every girl. So this is a significant problem that we're losing our boys. Boys are 4 times as likely to be diagnosed with ADHD. I do want to specify, however, that ADHD manifests in girls quietly, and it manifests in boys loudly. And so that's why boys tend to be more highly diagnosed, even though the incidence is about 50-50. And as far as medications go, this has been our favorite solution. This is a pretty amazing statistic to me. 75 to 80% of the world's ADHD medications are being given to American boys, which is, sort of a wow, astonishing kind of statistic, isn't it? So I would like to suggest that maybe we're medicating them just simply because they're boys, because we don't know exactly how to handle boys in a traditional classroom. And boys who move a lot, boys who are not well focused, not easily focused, we just diagnose them with ADHD, put them on some kind of medication, and then at least they're quiet. And we can go on with teaching the rest of our 20 or 30 students in our classroom. The PISA tests are problematic. Anybody here know what the PISA test is? Just raise your hand. Okay, great. Some of you do. So, my mystery. Okay. PISA tests are, these are tests that are given, you've seen the Chevron oil commercial where they say, the U.S. is number 11 in education. Those are based on what's called the PISA test. These are international tests, and they look at achievement in math, science, English, language arts, reading, etc. And the PISA tests are really problematic because in some countries they don't test everybody, but in America, for instance, they test everybody. So these rankings that we get are really very false. You shouldn't believe them or listen very hard to them. But what is interesting is that in this last administration of the PISA tests, we had boys and girls in a very interesting position. In the past, in the history of the PISA test, boys have always done a bit better than girls in math and science. And girls have always done a bit better in reading and language arts and skills of that sort. All of a sudden this year, for the first time in every country to which girls have access to education, we had girls doing better in every subject. Math, science, English, reading, everything. In all the big countries. Canada, the UK. Anywhere where girls have access to education, they did better than boys on all subjects. Which was a really remarkable and sort of earth-shattering statistics that came out about a year or so ago for everybody in gender studies. Okay, and in higher education, as we go up through the ranks now, we've got this very interesting statistic here that for every 100 women who earn a bachelor's degree this year, about 71 right now men will earn one. And that X is pretty interesting. The axis of the X is 1983. So just to give you a sense, it was 1983 when half the degrees were going to men and half the degrees were going to women. And so you can kind of see some of these, the last 2 columns are projected, where we're headed. So we're losing men on campus, we're losing men in higher education, which is a significant concern for everybody who's interested in higher education, as well as the K-12 school. My argument is games are not causing this problem with boys. Games are simply a symptom of their alienation. And games are not causing boys to tune out of universities. Boys tuned out of universities in elementary school. They checked out long before they got to university games. Okay, I'll briefly touch on these, but I'm not going to spend a real long time on them because I know we're limited, and maybe some of you have already seen some of this in the TED Talk that I did. But why do I think these things are happening? I think that there are 3 or 4 reasons. One is zero tolerance policies. For those of you who are familiar, these are the policies that basically say you can't, beat up another kid on the playground, for instance. You can't bring a gun into school, and you shouldn't bring knives into school. These kinds of policies make a lot of sense. But unfortunately, a lot of them have been implemented in ways that have not been very healthy for what we would think of as normal boy development. So boys develop a normal, healthy relationship with violent fantasy life. And there's nothing scary about that or wrong with that. It's just part of who boys are. And we have been saying, no, you can't write about that, you can't read about that, you can't talk about that. And if you do, then we're likely to send you to a psychologist to find out if you're really okay. So, so the way the zero tolerance policies have been enacted are really problematic and sending boys a message that their normal development isn't acceptable. There's something called the compressed curriculum. Many of you are probably aware of it. What I did in kindergarten, my kids did when they were 3. What they did in 4th grade, I did in like junior high school. So the curriculum expectations are getting more and more compressed. And as we do that, it also means that boys need to, and girls, need to sit down more, they need to be still more, they get less free play time, they get less recess time, and the statistics are all showing that this is not particularly good for any active kid. So the compressed curriculum is particularly hard for all active kids. There are about half as many men in today's elementary school classroom as there were 15 years ago. So pretty much everybody in this classroom, excepting these kids here probably, don't know what it means to go to a school, an elementary school, where 97 or 98% of the teachers are female. We went from 93% to 97% in the last 15 years in elementary schools as teachers. This is a remarkable thing. So it impacts the culture of the school, and we start saying, well, what's happening in that in the teacher's lounge when they're sitting around talking about Johnny is getting out of control on the playground, what do we do with Johnny? If there are no men sitting around that table, it changes the conversation. If there are women around the table who have raised boys, it changes the conversation. So you really have to think about sort of who are in these classrooms. Not very many men. Almost no black men in these classrooms. And all these statistics are far worse if you happen to be black or poor or Hispanic. Okay? So what can we do? Well, one of the things that I've been working on a little bit is something called the Bring Back the Boys Project, which is a website portal. It's still under development, but it's coming along pretty well now. We have a number of different resources on here. Mostly we're trying to reach teachers and parents of boys. We're trying to give them a good resource for things like lists of books for boys, videos for boys, some reviews of video games, things like that. We've got some media, some research, radio talks and video talks from various people like James G. And we've videotaped Constance Steinkuhler and Kurt Squire, and some people who've been doing stuff with gaming and tried to get some resources up there so that parents would have access to the latest in thinking about boys and games and boys and school in general. So that's one of the things that we have been working on. Let me go back to this mode. And I'm wondering, another thing that we've been doing is thinking about how to integrate games into the classroom and how to help teachers see the merit for games in classrooms. How many of you are aware of Minecraft? Okay. How many of you have ever used Minecraft in your classroom? If you have a classroom. Thank you, Tanya. Okay, great. Well, for those of you who haven't, and if you need a little bit of idea about what you can maybe do with Minecraft in a classroom, this is more in the K-12, but it could easily be nicely integrated into university learning as well, depending on what you're interested in learning. So I'm going to give you like a 5-minute video here, maybe it's a little less, but he does a better job of inspiring and telling you all the possible uses of Minecraft than I do. And then I'm going to have some comments about this after we watch the next video.
Minecraft is the ultimate educational tool. You guys remember Minecraft. We made this other video about it that one time where we talked about how it's basically going to save us all. But in case you need a refresher, Minecraft is a computer game that can best be described as first-person Legos, with a dash of husbandry, a heaping helping of architecture, and a pinch of Slay the Dragon. In survival mode, you have to gather resources and materials and fight the bad guys, some of whom are very sneaky. In creative mode, you get to, ready for Nicolas Cage, go nuts. The pixely sky is the limit. You can build whatever you want, and then start a multiplayer game and invite all your friends. You can import and export 3D models to make structures. You can share your creations with your coworkers and pals, or your students towards the end of teaching them the finer bits of computer science, art history, engineering, civics, math, world history, and maybe most things. Say what? What? Now, before we get to talking about Minecraft specifically, let's talk about computer and video games in general as educational tools. There is a long history of using pixels to teach kids about stuff. For about as long as there have been affordable computers, there have been educational games to put on them. Logo taught you how to program that turtle, and Lemonade Stand taught you how to build your lemonade empire. Oregon Trail taught you, always ford the river. Never ford the river. Mavis Beacon, Reader Rabbit, Big Brain Academy, and the list goes on. They're all great games, but they all share a common, problematic shortcoming. What if you don't want to teach typing or reading? Sure, you could use Virtual U to teach management, or Zapitalism to teach economics, or Roller Coaster Tycoon to teach roller coastering. But these games can't be specialized or made immersive. They lack even the basic technology for fluidity or improvisation, two things which are paramount in teaching. Like, what if you want the game to be different every year, or every class, or collaborative, or portable? Or what if you're a grade school teacher and you have to teach 10 subjects, each with many units and ideas to cover? If only there were some way to build a fully customizable networked environment that was both fun and inexpensive. Aside from being an exceptionally effective way to avoid doing your homework, as it turns out, Minecraft is also an exceptionally effective teaching tool. Sorry if I just totally ruined Minecraft for you. Probability? Build a random animal dropper. Physics? Measure the time it takes a block to fall and then talk about gravity. You can build Minecraft versions of famous bits of architecture or sets for Shakespearean plays. You can place works of art inside of a Minecraft gallery, or use Minecraft's mathematically ideal blocks to talk about volume and area. Teach a foreign language with in-game signs, or tell kids they can only communicate with each other on a collaborative task in, I don't know, Latvian. The possibilities of what you can get into and out of a game which you thought was just for punching trees are endless. And kids respond because it's a creative, collaborative, entertaining environment where they are in control of their own challenges, which can be many. There's something like 1,000 Minecraft mods for all kinds of things. Like Computercraft is a mod which lets people write Lua programs inside Minecraft. There is even, are you ready, an official Mojang licensed version of Minecraft for education called Minecraft EDU. Spearheaded by Joel Levin, aka Minecraft Teacher, Minecraft EDU is to Minecraft what the Teacher Edition is to your history textbook, except cooler. With 20 installs at over 1,000 schools across 6 continents, the number of students currently learning with Minecraft EDU alone is at least 20,000. Now, am I saying that we're going to see Minecraft or even video games in general in every classroom? Probably unlikely. Setting up this kind of thing requires a certain investment in technology, time on the part of the teachers, and a certain technical proficiency which, I mean, we all know the chance a piece of technology will fail is directly proportional to the number of people watching it in operation. But should we hope to eventually? I say absolutely. Studies have confidently stated things like, data analysis shows that classes using the game had significantly higher means than classes not using the game. Source in the description. And the number of teachers documenting their overwhelmingly positive experience using Minecraft in the classroom is huge! Another source in the description. So the question might not be whether or not we use games in schools, but rather how far do we go? Game designer and advocate Jane McGonigal thinks that we should go all the way. In her book, Reality is Broken, she describes a school which does not use games, but is a game. She writes, every course, every activity, every assignment, every moment of instruction and assessment would be designed by borrowing key mechanics and participation strategies from the most engaging multiplayer games. Admittedly, we're probably pretty far from that point, but as video games continue their search for legitimacy, as forms of entertainment, artworks, containers for narrative, and now educational tools, Minecraft's use in the classroom is a pretty important step. A hugely popular game made for entertainment used by a small but growing number of teachers to show that game-based learning is, in fact, worth its weight in obsidian. And who knows, maybe someday there will be a Minecraft university. What do you guys think? Are video games the future of learning? Let us know in the comments. And you should mine this block to subscribe. Go ahead, mine it up. Get your mine on.
Alright, so if you hadn't thought of something from Minecraft before, you probably have now. Language, history, physics, math, culture, art, all kinds of things here are opened up in this short little video with lots of different suggestions of ways that you might think about using Minecraft. Minecraft EDU is not my favorite because basically Minecraft EDU takes out some of the fun stuff. Not all the fun stuff, but some of the fun stuff. And specifically, Minecraft EDU takes out the zombie pigs and zombie sheep. And those are super fun to kill. And so my question is, why did we have to take the zombie sheep and zombie pigs out? What is it about school culture that makes it so uncomfortable for them to even have zombie sheep and zombie pigs? Not likely to inspire any real-life violence from zombie pigs and zombie sheep. If you can find a zombie pig to kill, you probably should anyway. But this is very clearly fantasy. And everything is built in little blocks. I mean, it's clearly not a very realistic kind of violence. And yet schools felt that they had to take that out in order to make it palatable for boards of education and parents and so forth. So this is kind of interesting because it highlights where we see the disjuncture between school culture and boy culture, and why kids would rather play Minecraft at home than play it at school. The other thing is, I don't like gamification that much. I'm not a big gamification person. And part of the reason why is because I think that, so gamification, for those who aren't aware, gamification is the creation of, or the overlaying of game principles onto a traditional setting. So Jane McGonigal is saying, and she's also against violent video games, so she and I don't necessarily agree on all these things, but she says we should be doing gamification in all tasks of life. So you want your kids to fold the laundry, make it a game, and give them points, and and we've done token economies for a pretty long time. I think we all know that, yeah, that can be motivating for a while, but we've had a lot of really good research that shows some interesting things about internal and external motivation, intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, and what that does for you in the long term. So I think that what's interesting about a lot of the really serious games is they're not gamification. They're not overlaying games or token economies onto school. They are actually engaging them, and the game itself is intrinsically motivated. So it's not like it's not the extrinsic motivation that gets you through these very mundane tasks. Most people think games are super fun all the time. The reality is if you play any of these games, they're very hard to learn. They take a really long time to understand, and they tend to be a lot of mundane tasks that one has to get through before one gets to a more fun kind of thing. So, so I would argue that gamification is probably not my favorite method for thinking about how to use games, integrating them into the curriculum, although I think that can be useful in certain circumstances. Excuse me. So, here's the stuff that I've been working on just real briefly, and there's a fourth that I'm going to add in here just to mention it, although it's still very early in the early stages. I've been working with Mike Pettner and Sean Bashaw, looking at how teachers feel about games in their classroom. I'm going to show you a little bit of video from that study. I've been working with Jason Eggerman, who has been working diligently with young men in middle and high school to talk to them about what is it that you do when you play games. If you ask a kid what they learn when they play games, they will say absolutely nothing. But when you ask them what they do, they'll tell you all kinds of things that they're doing that actually represent learning. And so what we're doing is extrapolating from that what they're learning and then applying that to the Common Core standards. So we're taking off-the-shelf games, what they're already using and interested in, trying to figure out how it works in traditional learning, what we think of as traditional learning in the Common Core standards. And then Doug Wilson has been doing some work with me in higher education. Penn State it happens to be a university that has 50% female, 50% male population, one of the few remaining universities that still have that ratio. Most schools are 60-40, 70-30. But what's interesting is that among our failing student population, 2/3 of them are male. So you would expect to see a 50-50 split there too. You don't. You see 2/3 of the failing students are male. So we're trying to figure out why is that happening? Why are our young men in university, not responding in ways that lead to more success? So those are the broad brush studies that are under my research province right now. The other one is looking specifically at games to understand better what leadership skills are being taught inside of traditional off-the-shelf games, and I'm hoping to have something on that starting next year.
Their writing as well.
So what we're going to look at first are the Pettner and Bashaw teacher reviews, and we're going to hear some pretty interesting things from some teachers, and then we'll do a little bit of looking at some of what the young men are saying about games.
Oh, and that's the only place it really starts to concern me.
This is a second grade teacher, and she's talking about what she hears and sees about gaming among her students.
It's because they write about playing video games, and I ask them, well, don't you do anything else? And they say, no, I can't think of anything else to write about. Until the point where I had to ban writing about video games, just because I couldn't get anything else out of them. Which is okay, if that's their interest, that's fine, but
it's really not okay, or she wouldn't have banned it. So she feels like it should be okay, and I think she knows that she wants to be accepting of it, but she wants them to write about different things. She talks also about girls having interests, but she says that there are different kinds of interests.
Sometimes I want something a little bit different, too.
I think it's an underlying current in our society that...
Now this teacher has a very interesting perspective. His concern is that students are going to be doing things that aren't on task. And so the issue here is one of, do we feel that it's better to maintain what Al Become called coercive learning? For anybody who's read the book I Won't Learn From You, it's a coercive learning strategy where basically, we tell them what they have to learn. Or do we open it up and say, what is it that you're learning from what you are naturally interested in doing? Which is just a very different way of thinking about it. So you can see from the coercive learning perspective why gaming is really problematic.
You know, the multimedia games and the things that are a distraction mentally, you know. And even when I get out the laptops, there's the wantingness to go to a game site versus something else, and that's natural, I think. You know. And you know, other technology too is the cell phones. They're in their pockets. They're doing that while instruction is occurring, of course.
I see evidence in their conversations.
So kids have cell phones, and the reality is that kids have pretty much all of the world's information in their pocket, in their hand. And so what is the role of a teacher if it's no longer to hold the answer key, right? So I think that this is something that we have to understand. If we want to integrate technology and games in particular, we want to let kids have cell phones in school, then we have to think a little bit about what does that mean for the identity of the teacher? What does that mean for the role of the teacher? Because it's going to be very significantly different. Now this woman, I really love what she has to say because I like to look at the language that she's using around the culture of gaming. She talks about kids in her classroom who are talking about games.
Especially boys are at 8th grade, which is 13, 14, 15 years old. They are very preoccupied with the activities they do outside of the classroom, which to a large extent is playing video games, or maybe it's sports, either participating in a sport or watching sports on TV. They're very preoccupied with that. Girls have things they're preoccupied with, but not typically video games, as far as I can tell. Just as far as I can tell by their kind of conversational topics. Boys will talk on and on and on about the video games. Currently this year, 2010, Call of Duty is what they talk about, and they are talking from within the game and shouting across the room to each other, hey dude, I just saw the D-Day opening, which means, I don't know what, some sort of D-Day war scenario. They achieved a game ranking that allowed them to enter into this new level of gameplay. So they'll talk about that, or the kinds of little levels or certification badges that they earn that show up on their status. I think this is an online role-playing game, and the more you play, the more kind of badges you get, or something like this. Of course, then they also have skills, and then they play against other kids who are online. So they do things like pwning noobs, which is beating up or killing the newbies, or showing their fancy footwork. I guess I can only imagine that they're in a little action figure, and there's another little action figure that they're destroying in some way, or whatever they're doing to show their superiority. So
I find this really fascinating to listen to her talk about gaming, because she's basically, saying these things. Clearly she does not understand gaming, which is okay. She doesn't necessarily have to understand gaming. But if we wonder why boys are alienated and turned off, this is a person who doesn't understand a huge part of their culture, and she's saying not very nice things about it. She's saying that they're little action figures, and most people who've raised boys will tell you, don't call it a doll if it's really an action figure, and don't call it an action figure if it's really a game, because that makes them feel bad about it. Basically, it doesn't give it any respect. So she talks about this in sort of a way that feels disrespectful, I think. And if it was your culture, you can understand. If we took those same words and we applied them culturally to a minority culture, we would be very offended. And if you happen to be a boy in the classroom who feels like you're the minority culture here, because all the teachers are girls, you're probably going to be not talking about, not writing about, not thinking about games a lot, because this is, a pretty uncomfortable place. I believe the next part of this is, and I'll just do a couple little pieces from the next part, which is talking about typing of the dead. Has anybody heard of typing of the dead before? Yeah, good. Have you played typing of the dead? No, you've seen it before. Yeah, so typing of the dead is a game in which if you learn to type well, you can kill more and more zombies. And it's pretty gruesome and fairly violent. And so we showed this to some teachers and said, what do you think about this?
Owning
in
news
your
is
class.
what they look for.
There's typing at the desk. You can tell this is,
So you're learning how to type by killing zombies. And you're competing with someone else who's also typing?
It's like a co-op mode. So yourself and a teammate can work together to get to the level. You both have to type.
Well, yeah. I guess sometimes you do what it takes to make it interesting. I don't know that killing zombies is the best approach in my eyes. But I'm sure the kids would be motivated to win and to learn to type better. I don't like the violence.
So this reminds me of the man pledge, is that what it is? I'm a man, I can change if I have to, I guess. It's what, like, really he doesn't want, there's very clearly not something that he wants to do, right? So I'm interested in all of these teachers, we have several teachers talking about this, and they all say very similar things. The violence is really problematic. A school board won't approve this. Parents won't want this in the classroom. It might be motivational, but the violence is just unacceptable, basically, is what they end up saying. I'm trying to remember. Okay, good. So what are the problems with games? Violence, competition, and individual achievements, basically. Right? These are three things that are very foreign, especially in elementary level classrooms. We want collaboration, cooperative learning. We want families in our classrooms. Everybody needs to learn to get along. If you don't get along, we're going to make sure that you go to a counselor to try and work out any problems that you have so you don't get along. Competition, we prefer that you keep that out of the classroom. Don't bring it in from the recess, playground into the classroom and things like that. So there are some pretty significant problems that come up when you start thinking about putting games into the classroom. But some of them are pretty interesting. Violence is an interesting one in particular. The media has pretty well convinced us all that gaming leads to actual real-world violence. And in reality, a lot of studies are actually showing the opposite now. I think the tide is turning a little bit. So even though we get still a lot of reports, every time there's a mass shooting, we get a report that there's some link to gaming. There are some pretty interesting studies out there. Most recently, there was a study that looked at children who had been involved in trouble with the law. They were teen boys who had been in trouble with the law, and they basically said, we're going to follow these kids. So it's just correlational. We're going to follow these kids and find out how many of them get in trouble with the law a second time. So recidivism is what they're measuring. How many times did they get involved with the law again? And they found gamers were much less likely to get involved with the law a second time than non-gamers. We might think that that was a little anti-intuitive, but in reality, when we hear from some of the boys, you'll hear that that's not so strange because it's a place where they can escape, it's a place where they control, it's a place where they learn how to work out their frustrations, step away from it, come back to it. They develop a lot of skills for handling these violent situations that they don't have if they don't game, is the assertion of that particular study at any rate. Newkirk's book on misreading masculinity is classic in this case. If you're interested in understanding better why boys have a violent fantasy life and why violent video gaming is interesting to them, read Misreading Masculinity. Excuse me. Of course, competition is something that makes lots of teachers uncomfortable. It can undermine classroom dynamics. It can create more violence. There have been a couple of studies that have indicated that in Japan, where they watched kids right after they played violent video games, and they tended to act out more in that instance. So we do have some research on the other side. And it can maintain some inequality. One of the things that's really interesting is that there are a lot of women's groups now that are coming out saying we've got to figure out a way to get these games into the hands of girls. They don't want to play these violent video games, but we're finding that when boys play these violent video games, they leave that experience from their adolescent years ready to go in the world of work. They're ready for competition, they're ready for individual achievement, they're ready to do what it takes, they know how to lead, they know how to communicate to teams of people, a whole bunch of things that they learned in these games, girls aren't getting them because most girls aren't playing that kind of game. Okay, what do boys say? So this is now where we're going to hear a few words from some of the boys in terms of what they think they're learning. The first young man is going to talk a little bit about failure in particular, and what happens when he fails in school and what happens when he fails in a game.
It helps you get better strategies because you're learning from what you did.
Sorry, that's not the right word. That's all right. Well, we're running a little low on time, so I think I should put a little further along here if I can. Yeah.
It's like failing.
Okay, so the interviewer asks him, the interviewer who is fairly teacher-like, asks him, what is it like when you fail?
Do you feel about the fact that when you fail at school?
I can't really explain that, but it's hard for me to explain at least.
It's like failing. How do you fail?
I feel fine about it.
Okay, I love his answer. I feel fine about it. That's right. He can't quite tell her what it really feels like to fail in school, which is what? Crummy. Right? Yeah, it sucks. I feel like, I feel terrible when I fail in school, right? That's how he feels. But he sees her as a teacher person. He doesn't quite want to say that. You can tell that he's hesitating. He doesn't quite know what to say. Then she asks him what it's like to fail in a game.
You're fine about that? Okay. Because the reason why I asked you, because you sometimes fail in a game, right?
Yeah.
And how do you feel when you fail in a game?
You'll be good if it's a game that you play online. You lose, but yet you come in first place. You'll have good attitude, positive attitude. You won't have negative attitude.
So even you fails do have positive attitude. And do you stay these two environments? Do you think they're similar? Like failing in games and failing in school?
They're not similar because in school you do not want to fail, but in a game it's all right to fail, just not in school.
So do you think failing is part of success in the game?
Yes.
Isn't that what we really want all our kids to say about their learning? I mean, it's so powerful to hear this kid talking about what it's like to fail in a game and what it's like to fail in school. He wants to be able to, feel good about that failure because he just keeps going back and doing it again and again until he gets it right. And then he succeeds. And he says, you'll be good if you keep trying. You'll be good if eventually you'll succeed if it's an online game and so forth. But he says, but it's not the same in school because you don't want to fail in school. Because the message is if you fail in school, that's it. Right? It's done. You don't get the chance to go back and reformulate that. This next gentleman is actually a college freshman, and he is very articulate about the kinds of things that he's learned.
You're doing something wrong in practice, and your coach tells you.
Once again, I'm not quite far enough ahead here.
Analyzing text, and it wasn't forced upon me. It was a fun way, and I was doing it without even realizing it. So it helped me out. Just doing it for fun at the same time. Definitely helped with problem-solving skills. I'm not the strongest math guy, so I think my problem-solving skills are kept up to date through video games to an extent. I thought it taught me a lot of teamwork, a lot about cooperation. It taught me how to manage anger, my frustration, how to deal with losing. It definitely helped me deal with losing. So yeah, I think it helps me overall.
So a nice little synopsis of all the things he thinks that he's learned. He also talks about using context clues in reading that he's learned from gaming, using new language that he's learned through gaming, history that he's learned through gaming. So he's really a great source of information for the kinds of things we're trying to do with understanding the school culture and the game culture and the mismatch between the two, and how kids are really learning from games very different things than maybe what schools are recognizing at this point. Excuse me. So how do we use games? Probably not educational games. Every kid I know runs screening from educational games. We've had decades of them, and they really don't work. They're better than maybe some of the other things that they have options to do, but in general, educational games are not our answer, in my opinion. So I stand here as an educational technologist saying, I'm not interested in building any more educational games. It's kind of a strange place to be. Probably not gamification. There are some places where you can see it work, but generally it's not my favorite, method of choice. Instead, we start where they are. Ask them what games they're playing this year. And every year it's going to change, guess what? So you're not going to have a stable set of games that you're going to use every year because it changes every year. So you got to ask them what they're playing and where they are and what they're doing with it. And so you got to learn their games. And that means playing with them. So you want to show a kid that you respect them, play a game with them. You want to show a culture of boys that they're accepted, bring their games in and show them that you're going to be willing to play them and use them in some way. Can we think about flipping a classroom? One of the things that people talk about with games that's really problematic is, it takes a really long time to get a group of students up to speed in a really hard game, like Civilization or Pirates, or these are great educational games, kind of. Sid Meier's doesn't want them to be educational games, but that aside, they're good educational games, but it takes forever to get a kid there. So their homework is to play 3 hours of Civilization. When they come back the next day, you interpret for them what they learned. Right? So we flip the classroom in that way. Maybe that would be a possibility. So there are a number of different ways that we can think about, relying on good design principles and integrating games into the curriculum. Always think about the instructional design principles first. Does this match with what I'm trying to do? But I think a lot of times we close down our minds and we say, no, it doesn't match with what my goal is, because we haven't learned enough about the game to know that it actually might give you an entree into that objective that you have, and into that instructional design objective that you have. So that's my offering to you today, and I'm very grateful that you came out, and I thank you for that. And I would be more than happy to take whatever questions you might have. Yes.
Sally, since my experience is, especially in elementary, since we're seeing more females involved, how do we get them involved in boys' games as well? Is there going to be isolation when the teachers just focusing on the boys and the girls over there? Is there a way to integrate it all?
Well, there are some games that are appealing to both. So Minecraft is a good crossover game, for instance, because both boys and girls really love to play it. So you can find some of those kind of crossover games, although I don't know that they quite address the culture gap in the same way, especially when we eliminate all the zombie sheep and zombie pigs. But that's one way to approach it. But I get this question, it's a really good question, and I understand what you're asking. I think one of the things that's important is that girls really do need to learn some of these games. We don't want to isolate them from that experience, because what they're learning inside of that game is really important. And so they may shy away from it at first, but there were a lot of studies a long time ago that girls really didn't want to play with technology. So, now we're saying, of course, girls play with technology. That's not even a question, but that came after a generation of kids who, for a long time, the boys were the ones who were doing all the technology, and the girls weren't doing it. But now, it's pretty much, you can walk into a classroom, and you're as likely to see a girl helping to fix the teacher's computer as a boy helping to fix the teacher's computer. So, I think part of it is just kind of getting used to that and getting girls into some of these games. I think we can beat that. I think all active kids will benefit from using these kinds of games in classrooms, boys and girls. The less active kids who are doing really well with the sit down and write on worksheets kids, I think they're the ones who are most likely to struggle. Well, this is a really good question. So that's part of why I'm doing the research that I'm doing. She said, how do you get administration on board with this? Or parents groups, or leadership, school boards, etc. And there's no easy answer, accepting that if we can start to say, look, these are the things that these kids are learning. So here's a piece of research that says boys learn leadership, communication skills, active kids, decompress the curriculum, etc. Then maybe you can spread that out to an administrator or to a group of teachers, to a group of parents, and say, this is okay. And look at this research that says violence doesn't cause people to shoot up schools. Most of the people who play video games don't enact real violence. So we know that that's not the prime cause. Can it contribute? Yeah. Do we have addictive behaviors associated with video games? Yes. Do we have to be careful of that? Yes. If you want to make sure that kids no longer have addictions to video games, put them in schools. You know, the assurance rate to make sure that they no longer have addictions to video games, in my opinion. But you know what I'm saying. Ultimately, convincing people is a larger political project. And so we have to get the right kind of research out there. We have to have these kinds of conversations openly and start to get administrators to think maybe a little bit differently about how this is happening. Businesses are hiring off the leaderboards now. So, you want to convince a school board member who's a businessman that this is a good idea. You can point out that there are people out there who are saying, I want you to work at IBM, I want you to work at Hewlett-Packard because you are at the top of World of Warcraft or Call of Duty or Assassin's Creed, because these are games where you have to lead people and you have to communicate and you you know how to succeed, you know how to get through failure, you know how to handle your temper. I know you know all those things because you're really good at this game. So there are people who are actually putting it on their resumes now, where they are on various video games, because people recognize that there are real skills associated with these games that are being learned. Yes?
What do you think is going to happen now that the generation who grew up with video games is coming of age?
I think they're going to demand that we allow them access to video games and their cell phones in classrooms. I think, I think the era of me standing here and telling you something that you can easily look up online is coming to a close.
Oh, this gentleman had his hand up first. David.
Oh, just wondering if there's a danger of being plugged in too much. I mean, I come from California, SoCal, and, I would say the gaming culture is very prevalent. What I like about Wyoming, I feel like, as an outsider's perspective, is that there's more of a balance, especially in the rural areas. Do you think by allowing or even actively pursuing gaming in classrooms, especially with boys, that will just be then reinforcing that plugged-in mentality? So wherever you go, you're just, I see it all the time. I see they're not even looking up. You try to have a conversation with the kid and you can't do that.
Yeah. So that's a great question, and I think that it's a very legitimate one to be concerned about. The social lives of our teens is kind of what we're being concerned with there. There are a couple of things I would say about that. The first, probably and the foremost, is that I believe that what they're doing online is social. It's just that we don't accept it as social. It's kind of like, rock and roll isn't really music. So what they do in a video game isn't really contact, but it is really contact. It's just that we don't understand it in the same way because we're from a different generation, I would argue. So I think that's part of my answer, and I also think that we should probably be paying attention to that at the same time. So it's kind of a two-faced answer there to say, yeah, I think we should worry about it, but I also think that we need to open our minds a little bit to different definitions of what being social and being plugged in and being unplugged, what those things mean, because I think that they vary by generation. Yes?
How do you balance the difference between the outcomes? I hear you say that learning from games things in leadership and communication, and yes, but their report card has math, English, social studies, and so there's a real divergent what's valued in those two different areas. How are we going to?
Yeah, this is hard. First of all, I think that as the Minecraft video tried to suggest, you can build curriculum into a lot of these games. So you can build physics and math and science and all kinds of things into these games that we already have. They're learning a lot of those things. They're learning history, and then they bring it into the history classroom. They're making transfer, which we haven't always seen elsewhere. So I think that there is real transfer. Part of it, though, from a teacher and a parent and even a public's perspective, is that you have to be prepared to trust that system. I'm not sure we're there because we don't trust anything in the education system right now. We've got it so buckled down with so many tests. But what's interesting is, and I'm hoping to do some more research in this particular question, if you put a kid into a gaming kind of school, a gaming kind of curriculum, how do they do on the standardized tests? This will be an interesting question to ask. One we haven't asked yet because I don't have a school with a gaming curriculum, which is going to be really hard to convince anybody to do. Because the children are our future and they're our kids, and you don't want to put your kid into an experimental space potentially. So having a real gaming curriculum and then testing before and after is sort of the best way to get that answer in a sort of formal scientific way. I'm really interested in exploratory. I don't necessarily believe in a lot of that kind of work. So I'm interested more in qualitative research and interpretive research, and so my work is much more around the fringes of that. But if you wanted to get at the heart of it, I think you could do that. I will tell you that our kids are in a public charter school, very small public charter school, started by Kyle Peck, who's a professor at Penn State. That charter school has about 100 kids in it. It's technology heavy and project based. They do not teach the test. And those kids do just as well as all the other kids on the tests when they all come out. So part of it is, we've had to sort of suspend our concern about that and trust that this way of teaching project-based, there's 5, 6, 7, 8th graders. They don't move around the building. They stay with one teacher. They do these, really significant projects. And they come out of that with some excellent learning, excellent technology skills, and they're passing the tests pretty much as they would if they were in a traditional school. So.
Have you checked out the Quest to Learn schools?
Yeah, they're great. So that's Sasha Barat's group primarily. And I like what Quest Atlantis has done in particular. I like their stuff very much, yeah. But I don't know that we've seen enough evidence to say that's the way to go. And here again, I kind of feel like what Sasha's done there is more of an educational game as opposed to a game that would necessarily resonate with boys. I think that they'll play it because it's pretty engaging and it's pretty interesting, but does it go all the way? I don't know. So I'm suspending judgment on Sasha's work.
And back to your question, what kind of things to integrate in games, what kind of things of lessons do you do? Like, what kind of things do you use to test them? Discussions or?
It depends on what game you're using and what piece of curriculum you're particularly focusing on. That's an it depends question for sure, because that's pretty open. But building it into your learning units is really something that you do, and the way you start that is by asking the kids, what are you playing? Or what are you doing when you play that? And that helps you know what it is that you think might marry up with what you're doing in your curriculum. Yes?
Did you think that your website would be, you said it's under construction and when it would be?
The website?
Yeah.
Yeah, the website is under construction, and it's been funded by a small grant, which will be running out at the end of this year, I think, so we should have it done by the end of the year.
Well, I was wondering, will you have anything other, the information you said about women teachers and not understanding the culture of young boys? I'm a grad student, but I'm also a mom with a son in kindergarten, my first kid in kindergarten.
Yay.
And every single teacher in his school is a woman, and the only person that's a man there is the principal. And that's kind of nowhere. I didn't even think about that until you said that.
Yeah.
And so is there anything, are you doing any, do you know of any research being done into that?
Yeah, so I have a student right now, Sean Vaishaw, who is also working on the piece with Mike Petner on teacher perceptions of games. He's doing his dissertation right now on why men at the elementary school level drop out. So he's going to go and talk to men who have taught at the elementary level and try to understand better why they're dropping out. We have some ideas. We've had some online dialogues around the TED Talk and some of these kinds of places, the Facebook page that we have on the same topic. And men have said things like, but I wouldn't report this as research right now, but they've said things like, well, if I'm going to go through 4 years of schooling, I want to have a job that I know I can support and raise a family in, and that doesn't have a whole lot of risk associated with it, that I might get charged with something. So men at the elementary level are very sensitive to, how they're being perceived and what kinds of potential risks they take by going into that field. But that's just anecdotal speculation right now. Yes?
I guess, if the popularity of games is always a moving target, and the majority of our teachers are female and they don't play the violent games, are we just setting our teachers up for something they can't possibly keep up with?
Well, they can possibly keep up with it if they, if we start building curricula around it. Then it means that they're not doing something else. We can't just add it on top of everything else that we've already asked the teachers to do. I would say that's true. But I think that the reality is the best way for a teacher to understand the changing face of games is to sit down with kids and play games. And I think that shows, I think that the one thing that I found in all the research I've done in my 20 years as an academic, and I've done a bunch of research on school change and why people succeed in schools and what's going to be best for schools in the future, and I'm an educational technologist, so I don't really like the answer that I'm going to give you, but the answer that I got from pretty much everybody about what makes a school work is a caring teacher. The most important thing in any school is a caring teacher. It's not a computer, it's not a game, it's not, a kinesthetic solution for kids who are moving too much, it's not medication for all the boys, it's a caring teacher. So if a teacher sits down with a kid and plays a game and connects with them and says, I really want to learn what you're doing, I think then you have this relationship. And that's going to make, for that kid anyway, the experience very, very powerful, I would argue. So I don't think that solves your...
I'm curious, how do you build that into such a degree where they can actually learn the game as opposed to get a quick overview of, oh, here's my students playing Minecraft for 20 minutes at recess, which won't give them much of anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it then has to be built, if it's built into the curriculum and it's part of their planning period, and, that's why you've got to sort of prove that it's worth doing, I think, which is where we are right now, in the early stages of trying to do that. I am really hoping that I get a grad student in the next couple of years who's ready to take on the task of doing a very difficult correlational analysis of social mobility, particularly among kids from low socioeconomic status, among gamers and non-gamers. There may be no difference at all, I have no idea. But if we could come forward and say, you know what, gamers are ending up making $10,000 more a year than non-gamers, or they have significantly more social mobility in some way because they get hired by these companies or something, then that would be a pretty strong justification for thinking about integrating games into classrooms in powerful ways that we don't right now, I think.
Yeah, Peggy G and the folks from Wyoming School.
Yeah.
They've done I think a nice start for giving examples of how to build curriculum.
They have. Yeah, Minecraft and World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft is a hard one because it is so violent. And unfortunately, the new version of World of Warcraft is going to be changing pretty significantly, and they're taking a lot of leadership stuff out, which is sort of too bad. That's what I hear anyway. I haven't seen it, but that's what I've heard. So I'm a little unsure about World of Warcraft. Also, the median age of World of Warcraft players is 30. So it's not taking them where they are anymore, right? So I got to go to Clash of Clans or something like that. But
the
it is
idea
useful.
is they've taken a game and
that's right.
demonstrated how to build a curriculum.
Yeah, absolutely. And Katie Salmon has done some really interesting work in New York City looking at building a school around gaming, but it's more around game design as opposed to what you learn when you play games. So, yes, one more and then
what about some of the new MMOs that are coming out, like Star Wars and Destiny?
Say again?
What about the new MMOs that are coming out, like Destiny and Star Wars and Night or Shadowlands or whatever?
I think we got to see. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I think the jury's out. Until I see what happens and what kids are doing with them, I can't really speak directly to what it might do. Because I don't have a lot of intelligence on those games, so it's going to be coming in. Do you?
I played Star Wars, Destiny, Shadowlands, I think it's called, is not even out yet. It's just
Yeah,
beta.
okay.
Destiny's a great game.
Destiny? Okay,
Yeah,
I'm going to start looking at that next.
It has, it's almost, you have to work with people or you can't win. I don't have my gold membership yet, and I'm getting...
Is that Xbox?
Yeah, I'm getting whooped left, right, but then you see these teams of 3, 4, 5 go through the game like it's nothing, because they can't work together, they do have the skills. So.
All right, that's the Destiny.
Yeah.
I'm going to mark that down. Yes, Lynn?
Is economic,
Yes.
is availability of
Yes.
to these games linked to economic status, and so we still have the same problem we've always
Some,
had?
yeah, there's still a very large digital divide. Every new wave of thing that comes out, we have a digital divide. There are still kids who don't have access to the internet. Almost every kid's got a cracked cell phone in their pocket now, but they don't all have access to Xboxes and PlayStations and all of the latest and greatest. More and more, though, what I'm seeing with the younger generation is that there's less of an interest in playing on separate game consoles, and more of an interest in being able to play it mobilely on iPods, on iPads, on Androids. That's sort of, I think that's where it's going to move. I think we probably, my prediction for what it's worth is I don't think that we'll have some hardcore gamers who will always hold on to their consoles, but I don't think that that's where the future is. I think 20 years from now, people won't be playing much on consoles anymore. We'll be able to figure out how to make the graphics good enough on mobile devices. And we can already, with Apple TV, project mobile devices onto big screens, and we can get decent sound and things. And so, I mean, you got to have good, to make a good game, you've got to have good music, you've got to have good graphics, you've got to have, excellent motivational game principles inside of it. And, I think that we'll be better and better at doing that on mobile levels than we are right now. So 20 years, I give it, before we don't see much in the way of consoles. I could be totally wrong. That's just a guess. Yes.
With the Xbox Connect and Nintendo Wii having you get up and move, that's very different than classic games that I know.
Right.
How do you foresee that playing into all of this?
It's a good question. There are some people who are using Xbox Wii and a lot of these movement kind of games for online PE teaching, which is sort of interesting. That's one of the places that I'm seeing that happen a lot. There's a lot of mixed results with that. Playing tennis is not the same as playing Wii tennis. So, I don't know what I necessarily think about that, but there may be some possibilities in terms of kinesthetic learning that we haven't really explored a lot yet. Simulators are great, so, you know, if we can get ourselves into immersive simulated experiences, for kinesthetic learning, that's what we do for pilots, and that's what we do for, you know, firefighters, and there are a lot of really interesting ways that we train people in high-risk areas with very expensive simulators. And I don't know, maybe we'll get there with that technology. Right now, we don't have it. It's too expensive to make it work for the average, you know, person's learning. So, but maybe. Great. Tanya, thank you again so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate you all coming.